Great YouTube, Captain Machine here, back for another video. I'm still poorly, sadly, so I'm going to try and make this video between my bouts of illness, so I'm sorry about this if I cut this short or anything like that. Basically, I wanted to take you back to 1996, and me, my mum, my dad and my sister went to Blackpool, and those who don't know, Blackpool is a seaside resort with a rather fancy light show around it. In terms of the whole sea length is covered in these really nice lights. It's a big deal in Britain. I don't know about the rest of the world. I don't know if anyone knows about it in America, for example. And on the way back from going to all the arcades and the piers and the playgrounds and the theme parks, we stopped off at a newsagent to pick up some pop and some crisps and some sweets. And I had a couple of pounds left, and I picked up for £2.95 issue number 234 of the Dragon magazine. This is the first ever Dragon magazine I bought. In fact, this is the first ever RPG product I ever bought. This precedes my acquisition of a PHB, a DMG, Monster Manual. Now, I knew what Dungeons & Dragons was. I'd watched the cartoon, obviously. We played some Genesis games about D&D, and we played Eye of the Beholder 1 and Eye of the Beholder 2. And Eye of the Beholder 2's instruction manual practically is a PHB because it contains tables for stats and skills and proficiency. As you know, it doesn't have proficiencies in it, but it says everything else. And I'd even found a copy of Unearthed Arcana, which confused the crap out of me in my local library, considering I live in a small village, or relatively small village, compared to the big town I live relatively next to. So I had a rough idea what I was getting into going into this, but I suspect this magazine, first of all, is the reason why I got into gaming in a big way, because it just showed me the depth of how far deep down this hobby could go. And it was also a case of, it probably started my fetish for including Undead almost exclusively into my campaigns, which I'm starting to grow out of now, but maybe I'll go back to it now I've read this again. Because I've just been reading this last couple of days while I've been trying to feel better, and the nostalgia of it is really helping, because I read this magazine when I should have been paying attention to the lights as we slowly drove up the seafront. I would occasionally look up and go, oh, they're nice lights, and I'd go back to reading this again. And for those of you, anyone that knows me, that's a big deal, because I get car sick really easily when I read. So knowingly reading anything while the car's moving is something I don't normally ever do. And even when I was 16, I knew that. So this engrossed me. So I'll go through the articles as best I can and give you a rough idea what's in here. And if you ever see this on back catalogues and you like, say, the idea of Undead or Ravenloft or anything like that, I do highly recommend picking this up, because there is a plethora of information in here. And while the rest of the Dragon magazine collection I've got can happily go, this will always be on my gaming shelf. So we'll start with the first article, which is Nocturne Crusade. Nocturne Crusade, which is basically a collection of magic items designed to fight undead. And they're really interesting, weird items, because they're not just magic swords and magic armour and magic stakes, although one of them actually is. They're all kinds of weird things, like magic pipes, magic cloth, a magic vase, a font. There's a spell in here. There is a chime, an urn, some chalk. The really interesting items that you can't just use in straight group combat. They have uses outside of combat, or within the context of combat. You can't use them while fighting something, which is the point I was trying to get across with 4th edition way back when. Why I hated the magic items in 4th edition, because all the magic items in 4th edition were combat items, as in you're using this in combat and that's the only use it has. In this, you would never do that, because you'd have to literally drop out of combat to do any of these things. There's even a poem that makes undead explode in agony, but you have to keep reading it over and over and over again, and it hurts to do it, so that's kind of interesting. There is the Draconomicon name, which is interesting because that's now I think there's a Draconomicon into the table copybook thing, which talks about the idea that there's a really interesting picture there. Have a look at that. Really nice picture. Love the artwork, absolutely love the artwork. Basically, it talks about the ideas that the cult of dragons in the Forgotten Realms setting, when they created Dracoliches, could never have possibly figured it out in one try. So logically, the only explanation is that they went up the scale of undead, because there is a scale of undead in AD&D to get to Lich. So you've got rules for zombie undead, skeleton undead, ghoul undead, ghast undead, right undead with level drain bite, wraith, mummy, spectre, ghost undead, vampire undead. Oh dear, dangerous stuff, dangerous stuff. The Book of Souls, there we go, which is the first Ravenloft article in here. It's a rather interesting one because it basically talks about a spellbook that the Dark Powers themselves manifested to manipulate and control people, and it tries to basically coerce you into becoming what's known as a dark pawn, so you can serve their purposes. Maybe it's not necessarily an evil object, but if you encounter it, you probably want to put it down. You don't want to carry it. You've got some kits for the Ranger. You've got the Crypt Defender and the Crypt Ranger. The Crypt Ranger is basically just a ranger that hunts undead. There's been plenty of examples of how to do that throughout the history of the game. But I played one of these as one of my first ever characters in AD&D when we were going through the Dragon Conjunction. I really enjoyed it. So I was quite happy to have this at the time. Crypt Defender is something a bit different because you defend graveyards and crypts and tombs from grave robbers at the same time that you keep the possibility and the likelihood of undead manifestations down to a minimum. Really good if you've got a static campaign in one place, but terrible if you've just got a wandering campaign, because a lot of the stuff makes no sense for why you'd be wandering around. Undead again. There we go. Which is the reason why Requiem is so bloody hard to find. Because Requiem gave you rules on how to play undead PCs. This is back when White Wolf had just come out with their vampire stuff and everybody wanted to play the monster. And you got rules in here for boneless, crawling claws. I can't even say how you pronounce that one. It's the undead that vampire undead with all the organs sticking out of it. So it's kind of interesting. They did a series called Worms of the North, where they an interesting dragon from Forgotten Realms every month, and you get a really interesting write-up. You never get stats for them, but you got a really interesting write-up, and this one is all about Draconomicon. I'm not probably butchering that. Otherwise known as the Creeping Doom, which is a rather nasty Dracolich that'll just screw up your day so fast. So yeah, I do like that. That's a good article to read, and it even has one of his spells, his signature spells in there as well. Then there is a rarity on here. There's an article that's out of place given the theme, but it's Artifacts of Athos, which was my first taste in Dark Sun. And they are really powerful items, insanely powerful items, but they all come with curses. And I don't know if that's indicative of the Dark Sun setting in general, but when I was reading this I was going, I would love to include these in my games, I'd love to give this to a player character, but the curses were just ridiculously powerful. And maybe that's the point. Maybe the most powerful items have to have powerful curses to keep them in check. I mean, and some of them are living things. They're living creatures, the artifacts themselves, which I think has something to do with their psionic origins. And it was like, how do you use this? And I was like, it baffled me for a longest time on how to use it. And then I kind of got the point. Again, it's an interesting juxtaposed to 4th edition because it's a case of these are items which, yes, they have actual combat uses. You've got dragon skin, you've got Crown of the Dwarven Kings, you've got the something of the Chakuru of the Great One, which is some kind of throwing blade, and you've got the Eye of Prasrun. I mean, these are all combat things. You can use them in combat, but they come with really interesting histories, really interesting ideas of how to use them in your campaign, and they all come with curses which are really crippling if they're not handled properly. I'm going to have to leave it there and do this as a part 2 video because I just realised I'm not even halfway through this magazine yet.